be accountable could not be counterproductive to whatever we're trying to achieve. This is, my worries.
I understand your worry, and it certainly is a very important worry, and it's a concern for us all, because the key issue in empowerment is, it's like democracy, you trust the people. And if you question the people's judgment or the people's ability to make the right call, the right judgment, then you do have very serious issues, I think, and very serious questions. The key to making empowerment work, again, is skill and knowledge, capability. There needs to be that skill and knowledge. And I think it is our responsibility to provide that skill and knowledge. Any democracy relies upon the educated engagement of its people. And it is the educated engagement of its people. You need to understand that that becomes the first and most important key to do that. We need to raise the education level and then raise the engagement level through the process of empowerment. You do those two things, and you will, in fact, deal with your concerns. Your concerns will never go away, by the way. They will always be present. But they will be lessened the more educated and the more engaged the people are in making those decisions.
Now we're saying hello to our friends from Tijuana, Baja California, Mexico. Good morning, Dr. Belasco. Given the long periods that we need to train people, what other things do you recommend besides total quality management?
I don't think training needs to take a long time. I think the best training occurs on the job. I think the best training is part and parcel of a mentor system which occurs within every organization. I would urge that you think not of education as a classroom activity, but as education as an on-the-job activity. And I know this, in my organization we train computer programmers in C++ language in 3 weeks. Most people say it takes 6 months. We do it in 3 weeks. How do we do it in 3 weeks? Because we involve people in the process on the job of doing the work, working with a more experienced person. Think of training and development as an on-the-job activity, incremental, and I think you'll find that it does not take as long as you think. Other last comment. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. Ignorance is infinitely more expensive.
Thank you, Doctor. Now we're going to Mexico. This is the training center from Valle de Bravo, Mexico. Centro de Capacitación. Adelante. Training center.
Hola.
Hello? No.
Parece que se ha perdido la llamada. Vamos a continuar. Damos paso a una pregunta.
And now we have another question via fax. This is coming from Rainbird, Tijuana. Doesn't the Interlock performance agreement management system you described take a lot of time?
I think it does take a lot of time. I think it absolutely takes a lot of time. But I think that it takes a lot less time than the time that most people spend in meetings agreeing to things that never get performed, and then following up again and finding out why they weren't performed, having some more meetings and finding out why things weren't performed, and so on. I think by focusing people on the few most important things that need to be done, by encouraging people to truly be accountable for what they've said they're going to deliver, you actually shorten the management time and you shorten the execution time, which is in fact the only time that we ought to keep track of. It is the output time and the time it takes to create that output that is the most important. This process is in truth the most efficient process because you do the work up front in focusing and making agreements rather than the work in back fixing the things that didn't work in the first place.
This one is coming from Tulatepeji. Good morning. Question is the following. Could you explain a little bit about the influence of financial compensation on empowerment, considering that there are many institutions that have a very limited budget and with very limited and fixed remuneration. In other words, they don't have budget for increasing salaries.
Two very important points. Number one, in many government agencies and in many, in fact, even many private organizations, there are not a lot of extra resources around for giving or paying additional bonuses. I think that's short-term thinking, which doesn't help us understand and doesn't help us really accomplish our long-term organizational goals. Financial compensation is useful as a reinforcer, but it is never the primary motivator. The primary motivator of empowerment is the feeling that I've done the right thing. The primary motivator of empowerment is accomplishment, is doing what I know my customer wants, doing what I know I must do in order to help myself and my teammates and my organization survive. That is the primary motivator. Money becomes a reinforcer. We have found there are all kinds of ways to give additional money. Money can be given in the form of training time off, training expense. Money can be given in the form of perhaps movie passes or weekend kinds of activities or take your spouse to dinner kind of activities. There are many other ways you can give money without adjusting compensation per se. My third observation is that in general there is more money than most organizations think, particularly if you think in terms of how do we share the gain. Rather than we think of compensation as a fixed pie, I'd like to suggest that by offering to share an opportunity of a gain, we can then make the pie larger, so therefore we have more of that compensation pie to share. Three interesting thoughts apropos of your question, which is a very good question. Thank you for I appreciate the question. Thank you for it.
Now we have another call from Mexico, coming from the SECAP, Mexico. We would like to congratulate all of the organizers and the presenters for all the knowledge that we are being imparted through these video conferences. Dr. Belasco, you said that the stress has several causes. The question is, when do you think knowledge was greater? In the primitive, earlier times or in our time? And this is what leads us to stress. What do you think? Interesting philosophical question. Not having lived in primitive times, I'm not certain I can talk to the issue, and since we didn't write many things down in those days, I'm not certain we have very good data or information about what happened back then. My guess would be that we have always had stress, that stress is a permanent part of life, and that perhaps what we currently experience is stress at a higher level, or stress of a different kind. I am certain that the stress of not knowing whether you're going to eat tomorrow, or the stress of always being on the lookout and having to run away from, out of harm's way, I'm certain that causes a great deal of stress as well. The stressors may be different. My guess is we have experienced stress throughout all of history, I think. Thank you for this next question coming in from the Autonomous University in Mexico. This is the Medicine, Vet, and Zoo School in Mexico. Good morning, I'm Dr. Rocio Serrano, and my question is the following. In Sony, all of the personnel of the factory, did they all respond favorably, or was there a great rotation, turnover of personnel and staff and workers?
The answer is no and no. All right. The first part of the question you asked, did all the workers respond favorably? No. No, all the workers never respond favorably. All the workers never respond favorably. All of us never respond favorably to anything. I mean, that's what makes such diversity. I mean, it makes life so interesting. No, not everyone was wildly enthusiastically in favor of this process. In fact, the numbers in the beginning were relatively small. And the folks at Sony would probably tell you that perhaps 60% of the people are now more or less on board. And they've been working at it now for 5 years. But the answer also is no, that nobody lost their job as a result of that. So nobody was forced out. Nobody was told they had to do something. You pay people differently based upon skill. And that skill, the learning of that skill is up to each individual and up to the team. You pay people differently on the basis of whether the team meets certain goals or not. And it's up to individuals as to whether they want to participate in that process or not. So no, no one lost their job, no one was fired, and no, not everyone is on board. But you have critical mass that moves the organization forward. In any change process, what you'll discover is that right off the bat, you'll get 10% of the people who jump on board right away, say this is the best thing to ever happen since sliced bread. I believed it all along. I've been waiting for it to happen. Thank God you've now come. And then you'll have another 10% that doesn't matter what you do. They will never get on board. And then the other 80% sort of swing and depend. So that you need to keep working away and get the 20 and the 30 and the 40 and the 50 and the 60 on board. And that's what moves the whole organization forward. It's not pretty, and it's not very clean, and it's not very neat, but it is progress.
All of our participants, welcome. This is another question coming in from Sinaloa, Mexico. Good morning. I'm calling in from Guamuchil. Obviously, all these changes must happen given the urgency or competition. And of course, we need to have a vision. But how can we have participants within an organization to understand that this change is important? And how can we get them involved with the least stress possible?
I think it all begins with sharing information about customers and getting as many people as possible involved in talking to customers. This all goes back to having a transparent organization, talking about getting individuals to see their customers, hear their customers, see them in front of their face. I think that's the beginning for any kind of a change process at all.
One more call from Mexico, coming from the National Autonomous University, Mexico. How would you apply empowerment? How would you implement it in an educational higher education institution on an administrative level?
I'm currently working with 2 universities about this very issue. The process begins with a vision, of what we must be, and it begins with involving everyone in the organization, every secretary, every budget analyst, every maintenance worker in that organization to understand what the purpose of the organization is and how we are being buffeted by shrinking funds, by rising competition, by the changing nature of the student population, and so on, to bring that message, the message of the need to change, down to each and every person. We have had maintenance mechanics going out there and talking to employers about what they're looking for in engineers. We have had budget analysts out there talking to entering students about what they're looking to get out of the university experience. All of this in an effort to bring the voice of the customer and the sight of the customer directly up front to each and every university employee. I know it works in universities because I've seen it, I've done it.
This is a question coming from KTV, Brazil.
My question has to deal with the timing of trying to push forward the concept of empowerment. As you know, in North America, many organizations nowadays are facing downsizing. They are cutting personnel, motivation is very low. How do you expect people to assume responsibility and to be accountable when they know that in a few months or years they may even lose the job? I'd like you to elaborate the whole notion of timing, when timing is good to implement empowerment. Thank you.
There's a short answer and a long answer. Let me give the short answer first. any timing is good. The only timing that counts is right now. Now is the best time to do empowerment, regardless of what the other circumstances are. The somewhat longer answer is, I think you need to be cautious and careful about reading headlines, and the headlines, I think, mislead the rest of us. We read in the headlines about downsizing. We read in the headlines, let me give you one example. We read in the headlines about AT&T downsizing 40,000 jobs. Absolutely true. Though it turns out, however, 6 weeks later, it turns out there are only 18,000 jobs going to be downsized. And that will take place over a 3-year cycle time. It turns out that of the 18,000 jobs that are going to be downsized, please notice the numbers, out of the 18,000 jobs that are going to be downsized, 8,000 of those people are going to wind up with jobs in other places in the organization. So now we're talking about 10,000 jobs are going to be downsized. At the very same time, units of AT&T are out hiring 22,000 new people. So that for AT&T, as an example, there will actually be a net addition of 12,000 jobs. Be cautious and careful about reading the headlines. The fact that AT&T is hiring on in other divisions doesn't make the headlines, but doesn't change the reality. Within AT&T, despite the headlines, the morale is, in fact, given the attitude surveys, which I've seen, the morale, in fact, is holding very steady at a very high level. And, in fact, empowerment within the AT&T organization is working throughout that organization, as individuals in the organization know the truth. Those of us outside who only read the headlines have a tendency to get an incorrect picture.
Thank you, Doctor. We are now going to continue with the second module, in which Dr. Belasco will explain how to implement the change model in our organizations.
Let's review where we are thus far. We've talked about the change model. We've talked about creating a sense of urgency, creating the desire to be different, the answer to the question, why must I change? That leads to a vision of where we're going, a vision that talks about customers, a vision that touches one's heart rather than one's mind or one's pocketbook. And then we've talked about empowerment that asks the questions, who? Who is going to be responsible in making this happen? And the answer to who is very simple. It's the one-letter word called I. I have to be responsible. I must assume responsibility. I must step forward. I must empower myself. The last part of the change model talks about execution. So let's talk about execution. Execution fundamentally answers the question, how are we going to make this happen? Execution relies upon a set of 3 principles. The first of those principles is to build interdependence among units through interlocking agreements which reinforce, and here's the key word, shared objective measures and rewards. Let's look first at those. First, let's look at shared objectives. If you go back and recall that in the Sony case, for instance, every team knows the overall schedule, the budget, and the quality levels for the entire manufacturing facility. Everyone knows what they must achieve. Those objectives are set with all the people in the manufacturing plant, and everyone knows what they are. And everyone then knows what their particular piece of that objective is, how much their team needs to deliver. At the same token, we then build in the second major key element here, which are measures. Measures that are ongoing and direct from customers. In the Sony example, for instance, every team knows exactly where they stand every day because they're the ones that track it. Everyone knows how everyone else in the whole plant is going because those numbers are then published so everyone can understand how each team is really doing. Then you need to have transparent financial information. Going back to Sony again, everyone at the Sony manufacturing facility understands what the costs are, what their budgets are, and what their quality levels must be, so that everyone understands exactly what's going on. At the same time, the entire team gives each other feedback on how good a job they are doing. And that's what that 360-degree feedback really talks about. In the U.S. today, 411 of the Fortune 500 companies have some form of 360-degree feedback. What that means fundamentally is that if you work for me, the expert in how good a boss I am is you. So if anyone in the world wants to find out how good a boss I am, they would go and ask you. And if I want to find out how good a boss I am, I need to go and ask you as well. So that's the essence of what 360-degree feedback is all about. To truly get execution of a change, you need to have clear objectives that are shared by everyone, and then clear measures that, once again, are shared by everyone. And then the third key point here is you must have rewards. Rewards that are truly based upon the full value equation of what is the value that you're delivering to your customers. That needs to be based upon full stream profitability. So that at the Sony plant, again, every single individual in the organization knows how good a job his or her team is doing and how they stack up against other people in the organization as well. And then it must be based upon competitive benchmarks. How are we doing in comparison with, for instance, the other Sony manufacturing plants? How are we doing in comparison with the other TV tube manufacturing plants run by Thompson and so on, our competitors? All of this must be done with designer input. With performer input. Must be designed with performer input. What this means is that the reward system must be one which is understood and accepted by all the people in the facility. Look at the Sony plant as an example. They use a skill-based pay system so that as you continually learn more and different jobs, you earn more money. And the training for those more and different jobs is under your control and the control of your team. It is not something directed by management. It is something that must be empowered by you. So you are truly in charge not only of your own education, but then also of your own pay, because your pay is based upon the skills you have. In addition to which, a great deal of the reward system at Sony is based upon pride. You post every day the results of every team, and you have pride in your team, and you want your team to be the best team in the entire plant. And by posting the results every day, you can then see how you stand in comparison to the other people on the other teams. Pride is more powerful than pay as a reward. And I have found that true all throughout the world. I have found that true in manufacturing plants outside of Sao Paulo. I have found it in computer facilities outside of Bogota, Colombia. I have found that in service organizations in Mexico City, Mexico. I have found that all across the world, that pride, the pride of accomplishment, is an exceptionally powerful reward. To make certain that these objective measures and rewards are truly common across the entire plant and weld all of the many different teams together, what you need to have is what I call the Interlock Performance Agreement System. This Interlock Performance Agreement System provides for 4 fundamental components: team objectives, individual contributions, personal learning plans, and short-stroke 30-day action plans. This process is both vertical and horizontal. All of the people in the leadership team get together and they decide what they must do to create success for their customers. Then all the people in the 2 egg-shaped organizations, let's say one is manufacturing and one is sales, they get together and they decide what they must do individually together to create success for their customers. And then for any given customer, a team of individuals from manufacturing and from sales, they get together and they decide what they must do to create success for their customer. The process looks like this, and this is precisely the process in use today at the Sony manufacturing facility. The team gets together and they discuss as a team. There is no superior, there is no coach, there is no boss. The team gets and decides what we must do to create success for our customers. What must we do to meet the schedule, to beat the budget, and to improve the quality? And then each team member sits in that single seat and sees and hears from his or her teammates what we need from you so we can create success for our customers. This process is memorialized in a Interlock planning worksheet that you have on page 66 of your participant manual in the appendix. In that manual, you will see that it talks about what are the most important things you must do, what are the interdependencies, and then what are the measures. And it talks to both the individual and to the organization or to the team. It's important that everyone understand what their contribution is to the team and what the team's contribution is to the overall organization. And this process provides a platform for having that discussion and for gaining that understanding. Knowledge and insight is the best way to combat problems of stress caused by change. By creating knowledge and certainty, we help to deal with the problems of stress. We help people to deal with and understand how they truly must do their job in a new and different way, and who they're serving and what is now expected. By bringing that clearly to the forefront, we help people feel better, feel more secure in the work they do. In addition to changing those systems, the objective measures and rewards and the interlock process, we also need to do something about our structure. We need to organize our structure around customers, around those people that we serve. So, for instance, at the Sony manufacturing plant, the entire team, the entire organization rather, is organized into a set of teams that are organized around customers. The basic building block for those teams is the customer-focused team, organized around those people who are serving a particular set of customers. So the TV line has one set of customers. They're organized into one team. The line that's manufacturing computer screens is organized into a different team because they're serving a different set of customers. And then for each and every one of those individual teams, the TV tube line and the computer screen line, you bring down to those teams all of the resources that they need to do their job. HR, finance, sales, etc. All of this is done in an effort to make certain that we have a common set of measures, objectives, and rewards focused on a given subset of customers. First critical point. Second critical key to this whole process of execution is to have a commonly shared measurement and information infrastructure. Modern organizations today run on the fuel of information. And so we have to be certain that the highway that carries that information assures a common way of doing business across all units, across the TV line as well as across the computer line. We do that by making certain that two things occur. That we have a common set of measurements, number one, and number two, that we have a common scoreboard so we can keep track of how we're doing on certain measurements. There are 5 different kinds of measurements that we use. The first are the usual financial measures. At Sony, they track rigorously and in a disciplined way all of the usual financial measures. They also track customer satisfaction scores. Those are process measures as well. And then they actually go out and track behavioral measures such as how do customers behave when they are buying Sony products or when they are choosing someone else's products other than Sony. In addition to which, and in truth, the single most powerful kind of feedback is the feedback that comes from direct, focused, personalized feedback. The kind of feedback that happens when the teams sit down and talk among themselves about who's really doing what, and who's really carrying the ball, and who really needs to learn what in order to help the team provide a better quality product on budget, on time. And this, of course, comes from 360 degrees. Those 5 measurements wind up being on a scoreboard, and this scoreboard is displayed prominently throughout the entire Sony organization. The first scoreboard is associate growth and success. Associates being employees. Employees' growth and success. The amount of skills that people are learning and how they are progressing in terms of their own pay areas. How much of our customers' wallet share is Sony really securing? How much of the how much of the product market, for instance, do we really now have? How much market share do we have of the TV business, of the computer screen business? How are our margins holding up in comparison to what our budgeted margins were? And then the all-important, how do you really handle the benchmark? How do you really stack up against Thompson? How do you really stack up against a plant in Pittsburgh? How are you really stacking up against the plant in Manaus, as an example? All of these are both internal and external benchmarks, important parts of the scorecard that virtually any employee at Sony can tell you today what's really going on. Second critical key point is you've got to have a common information system that assures the same measurement systems across all units. People, however, are the key to success, and you've got to have the right people, and the people have got to be developed to have the right skills. So you have to develop people to take actions consistent with their capability and with the work they need to do. The key element here is that each and every person at Sony has a learning plan. And this is the important key point. Employees assume responsibility for their own learning. They work with their teammates. Each employee determines his or her individual needs and signs up for training activities through a computerized sign-up sheet. Manager's approval is not required. They develop their personal knowledge as a personal core competency. And the fact that that development is then rewarded with skill-based pay, I think helps to reinforce the whole notion that we develop our organizational competencies by developing our individual competencies. And when we're in a learning mode and when we're learning and growing is when, number one, we are both more satisfied and more productive and actually experience less stress. The fourth critical key to execution is to hold everyone accountable, to live the values of working together, the values of teamwork, and then to deliver the agreements that we have with our internal customers for budget, for quality performance, for schedule performance, to our external customer for the finish of the product and the quality of that product, and to our community. Sony has been extraordinarily active in terms of helping the community deal with issues that deal with community concerns. All of this goes back to the Interlock agreement process. It's all a way in which we bring people back together again, and we have team goals, individual goals, and personal learning goals, but in truth nothing happens until we get down to the 30-day action plans. And this is exactly what the folks at Sony, have. They have action plans that look like this, where they absolutely go back each and every week and each and every month and hold each other accountable for what's truly going on. Stress. Stress comes as a result of not knowing what's happening. Stress comes as a result of things spinning out of control. Stress comes because we don't know what's happening to us. Change is a major causer of stress. Change is a major causer of organizational dysfunction and eventually of organizational failure. And yet, it's strange because change is what drives the need to be different. And most of us love change when we are in charge. We are in favor of changes that we create. We are opposed to changes that are foisted upon us, that are created for us. The key to success, I believe, in managing change and therefore in managing stress is all tied up in this graphic. It's when you truly give people knowledge, when people know what's coming and know what's happening and know why it's happening, when they understand the rigors of the marketplace, when they have had face-to-face personal interaction with customers, when they have had face-to-face personal interaction with competitors, and they know how tough they are and what they're really trying to do. And when you take that knowledge, that personal knowledge of what's going on, and then you marry that by giving people true participation, true empowerment, participation in knowing what's coming, participation in helping to plan what's going to happen when that does happen, participation as the Sony example is, in setting team goals, in evaluating each other, in deciding on your own training, in helping to communicate all of those critical elements so that everyone in the organization assumes responsibility, assumes the empowerment to truly deal with the competitive forces confronting not only the facility, but each and every one of the employees in that facility. Only when you marry knowledge with true participation do you get the level of involvement and the level of commitment that will in fact distinguish the successful organization from the failure organization, and the successful individual from the failing individual. It is that knowledge and true sense of participation that I think creates the sense of good feeling, the sense of being in control, which I think eliminates or moderates the stress we all feel. I look forward